Hello everyone, and welcome to Mystic Fantasy Craft. My name is Ben, and today I wanted to show you some techniques that I use to finish prints. Today we'll be going over specifically some 3D printed LARP armor that I have in my store. So if you look at the bottom piece here, I'm going to bring it in for some details. You can see that there's some scuffs on the front where there was some supports. There's some scuffs on the bottom where there was some supports. But generally the layer lines are okay. So no matter how dialed in you have your printer, anything with supports is always going to leave behind some marks, and you're always going to have a couple inefficiencies in your printing. So I'm just going to show you how to finish those off today, and I'm going to go through the process of getting these ready for painting and photos. So I'll show you that just after this. As always, safety first when working with resin and 3D prints. You want gloves and a respirator at a minimum. So I'm going to try to get rid of these scuffs first by using some sandpaper. This is starting with an 80 grit sandpaper. You can see I'm going to rub these scuff marks off here. So the 80 grit is to kind of get rid of all the big things on the print. So I'm going to go over the scuffs. I'm going to go over some of the support marks on the bottom, just to get the rough spots off, the burrs and stuff like that that can irritate you while you're painting. Now you can see that I'm scuffing the rest of the surface here, just to kind of make sure everything's even. We don't want any deep pits from where I was scuffing versus where I wasn't. So now I'm switching to a 120 grit, and I'm going to go over the whole thing with this. This is just to make sure that the surface is nice and even and smooth. So you don't have to do this step. If you have, you'll see later that I've got plenty of perfectly good prints where I kind of skip that step, but so that piece is looking good. We're going to go back to the 80 grit here to remove some of the support burrs on the side. And then we're going to skip over to the 120. And as you can see, I don't go over the whole piece with the 120. I just go over the rough areas. And that's because I've got my layer heights dialed in, so I don't really need to sand most of the good parts. Same thing with this. You can see there's some stuff on the side and a seam right there. So I'm going to go over that seam with the 80 grit sandpaper. Then I'm going to go over it with the 120 grit. And then I'm going to go over some of the stuff on the side there. And that's just to get the burrs out of the way. So, sanding done, I'm going to take a paper towel, or even better is a tack cloth to use for these things, but I didn't have one on hand, so just rubbing off any of the sanding dust is what I'm going for here. You don't want to have dust under your prints. Okay, so for tools, we need a sponge foam brush, works best. Some UV sensitive resin I got in the bucket there. I'm going to pull it back in so you can see how dirty it is. Even dirty resin works, but I recommend using clean. And a UV sensitive light to harden the UV resin. So I'm going to take the first piece here. I'm going to dip some resin in. I'm going to do, for the first coat, you're going to notice that I do kind of a thin coat, and this is just to fill in all the cracks and get everything nice and even. So I'm really not using that much resin on this first coat. So we'll speed this up here so you can see it in progress. Alright, now you can see I'm going through and I'm curing the first layer with the UV sensitive light. As always, it's very important that you don't look directly into the lights, because it's really bad for your eyes. So I'm actually looking through the camera here as I'm doing this. But you only need maybe 30 seconds to a minute to cure the first layer, because we're going to be doing a second one anyways. And then you'll see me repeat each of these steps, so I'll keep this at full speed and we'll go through it. And finally, we repeat the same steps for the third piece. Alrighty, so curing done, we're going to take just a paper towel and we're going to wipe off any excess resin that's still on the surface because we don't want that mixing in with our paint. So you basically just want to rub these until they're no longer any purple. So now we're going to take 120 sandpaper grit and we're just going to go scuff basically all the resin. So this is going to make it nice and smooth. It's going to make it so that the paint sticks really well. And it's just going to have a nice even appearance. So this is again 120 grit sandpaper, and we're just going to go over each piece until you can't really see any dark purple anymore. And you'll see in this first piece I really get in the layer lines there, but I kind of realized halfway through that that's not super necessary. So these other ones I'll just go quickly over with 120, get a nice even smooth surface, and then we'll be ready for painting. Alright, sanding done. We're just going to go over this with a paper towel one more time to make sure we get all the sanding dust off, and then it'll be time to paint. So, painting ready. We're going to use just one layer of a filler primer, that way we can sand it down when it's done. We're going to do, with filler primer you can go a little heavy here, but you'll notice in the video that I'm going to go a little too heavy on this piece, and I'll point out why. But this isn't like normal primer and paint. Filler primer is meant to be sanded off, so that's why I'm going pretty heavy with this stuff, just to form nice lines. But I'm going to show you here in a second. I'm going to pull this in a little bit, and there's dripping on the side. I can't really see that with the camera, but it's starting to drip, so it's time to stop. Repeat the same procedure with the other ones, just hopefully minus the drip. We're going to put a nice layer of filler primer on the top. And once the filler primer is dry, we're going to come back and we're going to sand this, and it's going to be nice and smooth. As you can see from the camera, you can barely see any layer lines here. So we're back now, a few minutes later with the dry version, and you can't, it's hard to see with the camera here, but you can't see any layer lines at all, is what I'm trying to portray here. So everything's working out good. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these pieces and we're going to sand them with 320 grit sandpaper, a nice finishing sandpaper. You could go even higher if you wanted, but 320 works for me. We're going to sand each of these pieces so that the top layer of paint is nice and smooth. And the only thing to be on the lookout for here is that you don't accidentally sand through your resin. So if you're going to notice some purple spots pop up here on the video, and that's when I know it's time to stop, that I've kind of reached the base layer of paint here. So we'll speed this up and I'll show you me sanding each of these. Alright, and then once again, we're just going to go over this with a paper towel, make sure we get all the sanding dust off, and again, a tack cloth or even some compressed air would be much better for this, but you got to use what you got to use. So we're ready for the final paint. So as you can see, we're using some gold paint. I'm just showing you here a couple different options. My wife uses the Krylon. I'm going to be using the Rust-Oleum today, but both of them are pretty good products. So we'll get the paint ready, we'll shake it off screen, and we'll get painting. So with metallics, especially, it's important to do a lot of really light coats from a distance. Now my paint is a little old and was having some clogging issues, which is why it took me a little bit longer, but you'll notice I do just really light mistings, and even on some of these I don't even get them completely, and that's okay. The key to a good spray paint finish is just doing a bunch of multiple light coats. So we're back to the first one. Again, just light coats. We're touching up in areas that didn't get paint the first time. As you can see, it's starting to come out real good. Just going through my layers here. I'll hit the sides on these because they're a little bit tricky. But as you can see from some of the ones on the side here, the paint is starting to look real nice. Now on some of these curled bracers, you'll see I'll have to pick the piece up to get to the sides, and I'm spraying a little bit closer than I would have liked, but you know, sometimes you gotta do this to get to the side pieces, and that's okay. Okay, and we're back here a couple days later to see the finished product, and I think everything came out really nice. If you look here, you can see pretty much no layer lines at all. The main issue here is just that I have a really dusty garage, and if you want to try to get this without dust nibs in it, you're going to have a really clean environment. I'll put out a video later showing you how to get rid of dust nibs, but as you can see, there's absolutely no layer lines on this, so it came out really nice. But back to the dust thing, you can remove them with a Scotch-Brite pad and try to repaint, but in my garage it's not going to make a difference. I really need to get a paint studio set up, but to me this is good. There's no layer lines, everything looks nice, and the only thing that would be left to do to this to make it LARP ready is to put the straps on, which will be a different video, and to apply some sealant. As always, if you like these videos and are interested in more 3D printing tips or going through 3D printed armor, anything involving 3D printed LARP armor, and eventually woodcraft, please subscribe and comment on the video if you would, and thank you for watching.